creating a Viking broadsax. In the last 2 episodes, I created 4 long bars, 2 of which are pattern welded by twisting, and the other 2 will form the cutting edge and the back of the sword. In this episode, I will assemble these bars into a sword by forge welding them together. As a refresher, forge welding is the process in which multiple separate steel pieces are fused together with strong hammer blows at high temperatures. This process requires that the steel is very clean and not oxidized. Forge welding a longsword is particularly difficult because the surface area is narrow but also very long. As a result, this step is difficult to complete successfully. You just saw me grind the scale of the bars, squaring them off at the same time. If the bars are not square to each other, for example because they are slanted, hitting them with a hammer will cause them to slide apart rather than welding together. Clamping the bars together is a good way to check if they are square enough. If the bars are already trying to slide away from each other, it is very likely that forge welding will fail. I oftentimes need to go back to the grinder to make more adjustments until I'm happy with how the bars hold together under clamp pressure. Once I'm satisfied with the fit, I'm welding the ends together with a MIG welder so that the bars do not come apart in the forge. The recipe for success is patience and diligence. This is not something that can be rushed. I usually work for 4 hours at a time, and at this point I have probably spent close to 20 hours on the sword already. This should give you some perspective whenever you hear someone say, "You have 3 hours and the clock is starting now." That's just not how this works. Once the bars are at forge welding temperatures, I set the weld with light taps from the power hammer. The liquid flux sprays away when the bars meet and helps preserve a clean surface for the weld. As before, I would like to ask for your help by sharing a link to this video on your social networks. These videos are my attempt at showing how bladesmiths really make swords and knives. You may have noticed that the bars I assembled were not all of the same length. In particular, the material for the high carbon cutting edge was shorter. The bars that are sticking out will provide sufficient material for the tang. However, I need to create a transition on the grinder to help with the forge welding step that is going to create a smooth blade to tang transition. Now that the tang has been established, the blade needs to be profiled a little bit more. In particular, it's a little bit wide towards the tip at the moment. That is the tip that you cannot see yet. The power hammer helps with quickly creating the appropriate taper. At this point, I'm reasonably happy with how the bars came together. Another important consideration is that the grains in the metal continue to grow under heat. Large grains make the steel brittle. The grain growth can be controlled by normalizing the blade, that is, to let it slowly cool down. As an optional step, I sometimes remove the scale and even out the blade on the grinder. This allows me to see if the welds really came together and if there are areas in which more material needs to be removed before the weld lines disappear. As I said, this is not strictly necessary and I don't always do it. However, lately I've been struggling with forge welding longer blades and want to more closely inspect the welds before sinking in more time. So far so good. Since this is a single-edged blade, I need to establish a tip. My preferred method for that is to cut a reverse tip that needs to be forged back. The reason for doing that is to ensure that the pattern in the blade smoothly follows the blade edge. Creating a reverse tip is the method to do that. This is mostly an aesthetical consideration, since I find patterns just running off the blade edge to be somewhat ugly. The reverse tip method has its own challenges. As you will see, forging back the tip is very hard on the welds. So, this is also a good test to validate that the welds are solid. After forging in the tip at a somewhat steep angle, I slowly adjust the profile of the blade further to make sure that it contains a smooth taper. At this point in the process, I'm still trying to maintain a fairly even thickness of the material. Further tapering will happen as I forge in the bevels. The bevels create a thin cutting edge while maintaining a thick profile on the back of the sword. My initial beveling happens under the power hammer with a beveling jigger made. I usually do one complete pass on the power hammer and then do further passes and refinements using a handheld hammer. Beveling causes severe bends in the sword blade that need to be constantly adjusted. The bends happen because more material moves at the cutting edge than at the back of the sword. Unfortunately, making pattern-welded swords is not easy. It turns out that while everything was looking good initially, that I did not manage to completely weld the wrought iron bar to the rest of the sword. For now, I will need to throw this blade into the pile of failures. I might still be able to make a couple of smaller blades from this, but the sword project is doomed. However, I will not give up here and will start over without hesitation. In the next episode, I will catch you up on my progress and continued failures, including a brief analysis of the root cause. If you like what you saw, please subscribe to my channel. My goal is to provide in-depth explanation and much deeper insights on the process than you may be getting anywhere else. You may also join me on Patreon, where you can get early access to posts as well as credits on these videos. Thanks a lot to all my patrons so far, and I will see you next time.